From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. After more than 3 decades of public service, nearly 20 years running the Department of Corrections, A.T. Wall is stepping down. The 64-year-old sat down with Eyewitness News for a wide-ranging interview, how the ACI has changed, the most memorable inmates, and what's next for corrections. Here's our interview with Rhode Island Department of Corrections Director A.T. Wall. Director, first of all, congratulations on your retirement.
Thank you. I've had a great career and am feeling like I'm going out with a good head of steam behind me.
Let's talk a little bit about that great career. 3 decades of public service, nearly 2 decades running the Rhode Island Department of Corrections as the director. What made you decide now's the time?
The governor put forward a package of incentives that had to do with retirement in order to help balance the existing budget. And at first I wasn't particularly interested because I love my job and I enjoy coming to work, and one thing I can tell you is it's never ever dull at the Department of Corrections. However, when she put the financials out for people to see, I realized that there was going to be a real incentive to retire, and I felt as if I've had a great career and I am moving into the later years of 60. Well, what I should say is I've had a great career and I'm moving into that zone where people tend to retire, and I thought, well, this is probably the right time.
You took the director job in 2000, is that right?
Yes, I did. I was appointed director by Governor Lincoln Almond in 2000, and for the last 18 years, that's been what I've done.
So what do you wish you knew then that you know now?
I would say that I benefited from the fact that I had been a part of the department for so many years, and that was to my advantage. It's an interesting environment here in which people tend to recognize and acknowledge each other by the number of years served. If you go around a room in corrections, everybody will tell you their name, their position, and how many years they've worked in corrections. And I'm no exception to that rule. I have felt as if corrections was really how I grew up. I got my start at line level position, probation officer, back in 1976, and lo and behold, I'm still here.
What's changed in the 1976, 41 years that you've been in corrections? I
think the profession has become far more sophisticated. Corrections used to be kind of marginal. Somebody was convicted, a sentence was imposed. If it was a sentence of incarceration, and it very often was, they came to the adult correctional institutions, and that was their fate. We as a profession have learned a lot since those days. We now have the advantage of much more sophisticated tools, such as techniques for recidivism reduction would be an example. In addition, opportunities for inmates to obtain an education while they are behind walls. That can be controversial. Some people feel as if a convicted offender doesn't deserve that kind of opportunity. My response is, if they don't take advantage of that opportunity, then they're not going to earn time off their sentence, which is important to them because the two are linked. And furthermore, I would say to the public, you need to know that education is considered the most important driver of recidivism reduction of any program that exists in corrections, and that it would be foolish of us not to encourage inmates to pursue their education while they're behind the walls. Education
by inmates can be used to reduce their sentence, and I can tell you from covering the Department of Corrections and filing a lot of stories on it, one thing that angers a lot of people is good time, the ability for inmates to dramatically reduce their stay here through good behavior. And not too long ago, I was interviewing you about Craig Price's ability to accrue years of it, despite being a real problem child for you and this department. What is the defense of good time when someone like, say, just as an example, Craig Price can accrue it? What do you say to the people who just get so angry when they hear about good time?
There are a couple of reasons why good time is very important to the rehabilitative process. One is that we do need to give inmates incentives to work on the issues that brought them here in the first place. If all we do is warehouse those people, then they're going to come out and they are going to be no better than when they arrived, and they are going to wreak havoc if that's the only means that they find to continue what they would want to do in life otherwise. I would also say that the good time statute is not the Department of Corrections administrative rule. It was enacted by the General Assembly, went through the legislative process, and therefore has the seal of approval, if you will, from our elected officials.
But do you support it?
Yes.
So you support the good time statute?
I do.
Is there a one-size-fits-all problem with good time? There are clearly inmates, as you say, you want to give them that incentive to behave well behind bars. But when you talk about the Craig Prices and other examples of the world, is that maybe where there's an issue with the statute?
We offer the incentive, and we are careful to make sure that if somebody is going to earn that time, they have put in the effort and work that is necessary. We also tie the good time to program participation, to educational levels achieved, to other forms of work opportunities. It is not something that's given out lightly. It's monitored closely, and it does provide the incentives that we think are important to get somebody ready for life after prison.
Do you ever hear from victims of crimes for people who are staying at the ACI that have earned the good time and they've reached out to you and they're just upset by that? Do they ever reach out to you?
Yes.
What do you tell them?
I explained that this is in place at the passage of the legislation by the General Assembly. That second, we really do need to provide people with opportunities to use incarceration to make changes in their lives. And one way to do that is to give them an inducement. Namely, we will take some time off your sentence to the extent that you have participated in and completed the programs that we say are necessary for your rehabilitation. People will make jokes about the kind of time that's given. They'll say, oh, so you can earn 20 days for basket weaving. Absolutely not. That's insulting, frankly, and it does not reflect the ethos of corrections. You get good time if you've earned that good time, and you earn that good time by putting in the work.
I want to move on from the subject, but it's not just taking courses. I mean, you can just earn good time 10 days a month for doing nothing but just not getting in trouble.
Well, you can earn good time because it's built into the statute, and that too is meant to be an incentive. The fact is that what we're trying to do is change the behavior that brought inmates into our system in the first place.
I searched the federal court docket before this interview.
You did your homework.
I did my homework and found just in federal court alone, not in state court, you were named as a defendant more than 300 times in your capacity as director of the Department of Corrections. No matter what kind of touch you bring to this job, by its very nature, it's an adversarial or confrontational position, isn't it?
It can well be, yes. The fact is that I've been told by the Attorney General that I am the most named defendant in the state of Rhode Island. That comes with the territory. I am the CEO, as it were, of the correctional system, and if somebody is wanting to take issue with what we've done, then I'm the person that they're going to name in their lawsuit.
And they probably tend to be fairly litigious people at the ACI, with a lot of time on their hands.
Yes, that is true. Fortunately, we have a very effective legal team, not only in the Attorney General's office, but also here at the DOC. And most of those allegations about, in which I've been a defendant, are resolved without there being too much collateral damage.
What do you see as your single biggest achievement as director?
I would say it is professionalizing the department. When I joined the DOC, 30 plus years ago, it was still an operation that wasn't particularly sophisticated. And we were not offering the same kinds of opportunities for our staff to grow and develop. Same for the inmates as well. I felt as if we needed to step it up and to give our staff opportunities to professionalize by taking academic programs and participating in other activities that we thought would yield growth for them, and also for the inmates. It seems to me that if we are going to keep a captive population in here, some cases for a few months, other cases for much longer, we have some obligation to give them incentives to use that time wisely and appropriately. And while I recognize that it can be difficult for the public to comprehend, I think it's essential to the mission.
What do you regret?
I would say that I regret the fact that I haven't been able to generate more in the way of programming. We're far from where we were when we started, but it's clear that so much depends on giving inmates incentives to change their behavior and to adopt a pro-social lifestyle, that's really where an obligation lies. It's hard to get that money out of the public's mind because they think of themselves as basically subsidizing criminals. My argument would be, we're not subsidizing criminals. We are taking advantage of the research and the tools to bring those folks to the point where, when they are released, they will be productive and law-abiding because we've given them the skills that they need and they've adopted a pro-social mindset.
So my job as a reporter that often covers the crime beat is I find myself inside the walls of jails or prisons.
Sure.
In the Northeast quite a bit. And really from the layman's perspective as a reporter, it feels like you see the growing problem of mental health inside the prisons. And I can't help but walk around the ACI or the Dartmouth House of Corrections and think with some people, oof, that person needs a hospital.
Yes.
And not a prison cell. And I'm a reporter. I don't run a prison. I'm not a mental health professional, but it's really striking when you experience that in person. What's your perspective on that? Is it a growing crisis within?
I think it is. You are so right. The issue of mental illness has emerged as one of the most significant challenges that we face in corrections. The fact is that I think that we as a society have not done right by the mentally ill. In other words, they slip through the net of the mental health system. Eventually, they will make their way to the correctional system. And when they do, they now bear the label not of mentally ill, but of criminal offenders. And that's a difficult label to overcome.
Are you equipped to handle the severe mental health issues that you see? A lot of those, we saw them in, as you call it, administrative confinement.
Right.
Are you equipped for that?
We're trying very hard to put together the kinds of responses that we think are needed for mentally ill offenders. It is true that our model is a different one than that of mental health, but increasingly we've been called upon to deal with those very issues. The fact is that if someone is mentally ill here, they may not be able to follow our model. I mean, we have rules at the Department of Corrections. We tell you the rules, we assume you understand the rules and that you will obey the rules. If you don't, there will be consequences. On the other hand, what do you do with somebody who can't understand the rules, who doesn't know the difference between cause and effect, who is not able to conform to what our expectations are? It's a very difficult problem, and our staff at all levels are, contrary to what people might think, very sympathetic to the issues faced by the people that they are watching and observing and treating.
Is the percentage of mentally ill inmates increasing, would you say, over the years?
Yes, we think that is the case, Tim.
Is that a signal that they're just being diagnosed that way, or society growing in terms of mental illness? So did that population of society in general, and you're seeing that reflected behind the walls of your prison?
We have an ironclad no refusal policy, which means that if the court says you have to go there, we have to take you in. We have no discretion. So if you are mentally ill and that's what the court has ordered, you come through our system and we are obliged to treat you as best we can. The mental health system does what it can do, but because it doesn't have the backstop, what I call the ironclad no refusal policy, people slip through the net. And once they get to corrections, that's the end of the line for them.
So reflecting on your many years in corrections, there are just some names for Rhode Islanders that stand out as notorious criminals that have spent some quality time with you in the ACI, some who may never get out. Is there one inmate that stands out to you in that world as just a notorious inmate?
There are a handful of them. I don't know that I would try to rank them 1 through 10, but there are some who we at Corrections will never forget.
Like who?
Craig Price is a classic example. Gene Travis is another one. People who are profoundly antisocial and either unwilling or unable not only to comply with our institutional rules, but with the laws of society and the norms of the public. You don't forget those people.
What were your interactions with Craig Price like?
He was a very disturbing person. I mean, he would not have been in our system at such an early age, which was, I think, by that point, 14, had he not committed some vicious, brutal, heartrending crimes. I mean, I still struggle when I think about the damage that he did and the lives he took and the brutality of it all. In a case like that, it is my opinion that he would have a heck of a lot to prove before anybody ever released him. And the fact of the matter is that he has not demonstrated the slightest willingness or ability to conform.
Depending on what happens in Florida, that could very well be the case.
We're watching it carefully.
Does that keep you up at night?
The question of whether he'll come back to Rhode Island?
Or just his release in general?
His release in general? I tell myself that given the way he has behaved, not only in custody, but also, of course, in the community, that he is unlikely ever to be released again, especially after this incident in Florida where he went after another inmate and could have killed him.
So what you're saying is you're fairly confident he's going to continue to misbehave, thereby keeping him behind bars.
Yes.
So let's talk about a happier topic. I talked to somebody today who knows you, and they say you're a dog person. Is that right?
Yes, I have a soft spot for dogs.
So was that why you started, is it called the puppy program?
It's called the NEADS program, N-E-A-D.
Was it your program? Did you bring that here?
No, it was not. I did not create the program. It was in place in some other parts of New England, but I did learn about it and convened our wardens and said, turns out there's this program out there where puppies can be trained to be service dogs, and they would begin that process inside our institutions. And I opened it up to the wardens and said, which, if any of you, would like to host that program in your institution? And a particular warden from medium security was the first to say, I want it. And that's where we placed it, was at medium security. And it's fascinating the degree to which it has affected the culture. Everyone behaves better around the dogs.
Why do you think that is?
I wish I knew, but I know that I know this much, that I'll sometimes go home and say to my family, how about this? It takes a dog to humanize a prison. And we have plenty of examples. There was I won't name this particular inmate, but there was a very hardened, hardcore inmate who encountered a dog as he was walking up the path to go back to his housing unit in his institution. And he stopped, and the dog stopped, and the dog started licking him. He bent down, the dog started licking him, and he began to cry. And he was one tough inmate. It was fascinating to see what can be brought out of people when they encounter that kind of unconditional love.
So it wasn't the cement and bars that broke him, it was a canine.
Right.
So there's an intergalactic search for your replacement, if you were to believe the governor's office. And maybe you've heard some names, I don't know. But whoever it is, what is your advice to the next person to take your seat?
I think it's important to size up the situation as it is when you arrive, and to take account of and respect the history and culture that have shaped the organization in the way it has. I think it's really important to know your history and to do your homework about how the place works, why it works the way it does, and what we can do to build on its strengths and minimize its weaknesses.
Is there something unique to, you have the perspective of seeing other state prisons as you interact with your peers in your position. Is there something unique about Rhode Island that that person coming from the outside needs to know?
I would say that Rhode Island, as you know yourself, is a very relational place. The geography of the state, the history and culture of the state are such that people encounter one another in all kinds of situations and domains, and it happens frequently. What I would say is that there's a good side and a bad side to that relational quality. One is what we would call, you and I would call, I know a guy. The idea that your personal relationships trump your public obligations. And on the other side of the equation is the fact that because it is a relational place, we all have ways that we can communicate with one another. We know one another. It's not as if we are simply reading a cue card or going into a database. And so I think it's two-sided. I'd like to see the strengths of the relational quality shown, that is to say, really paying attention to one another. And I'd certainly like to see the weaknesses diminish. That is to say, the idea that I can get something for myself because I know someone.
Do you anticipate the prison, the ACI, is going to have to go through any significant expansion in the coming years? Is there a capital expense on the horizon right now?
We've done our projections, and we've even outsourced that to professional statisticians in the Washington, D.C. area. And it appears that our growth years are more in the rearview mirror than they are ahead of us. Of course, there's so many variables involved. Sure. But that's the sense that I have, that the population is not projected to grow dramatically in the coming years, and that gives us an opportunity to kind of take a deep breath, stabilize the system, and move forward without having to worry that we're going to end up stacking inmates wherever we can, in whatever locations we can.
That's probably a broader conversation which we don't have to get into, but do the numbers show there's actually going to be an anticipated decline in prison population?
We're not seeing, at least in Rhode Island, we're not anticipating a decline. What we do see is what's projected to be a very modest increase. The days, and you would remember them, when we were soaring over 4,000 inmates are gone. We are now down into the, say, 2,800 range. A lot of hard work went into that. Some of it is, again, programming that led to recidivism reduction. Others may be just demographic, numbers of people in the crime-prone years. But we are not feeling that same consternation and concern that we're going to end up with too many inmates and unable to manage them. Not going to happen.
Final question for you, and it's, you know, the expected one. What's next for A.T. Wall? Is this a straight up retirement and sail off into the sunset, or do you have something else that you're thinking of doing?
I have nothing concrete that I've put into place. On the other hand, I don't intend to sail off into the sunset. I will say that my wife, when she learned about the voluntary retirement, her family's from Portugal. She promptly went and bought 2 airline tickets to Lisbon. Good for 30 days. I got the message. Let's put it that way.
So beyond going to Portugal, using some of that extra money you're going to get from the incentive to retire, do you have any longer term plans, or is it?
I still love this field. I think it's so challenging. It's so multidimensional. It raises the big questions as well. And all of that I find very compelling. I don't think that I'm going to disappear. I also don't want to be somebody who hangs around at the party too long. I do want to contribute to the best of my ability for a profession that I really think deserves so much attention as ours.
A.T. Wall's last day as director is January 30th. I want to thank you for watching this week's Newsmakers. If you missed any of it, you can catch it online, WPRI.com. I'm Tim White, and we'll see you next week on Newsmakers.